Imagine a country where prices double in little more than 2 weeks, where food parcels for the poor are too expensive for the government to afford. Now imagine that this same country has the biggest oil reserves in the world and is likely to re-elect the man who's overseeing all of this shambles. We're talking Venezuela. On Roundtable, I'm David Foster. At the end of this week, the people of Venezuela will be able to cast their votes. With inflation, crime, poverty and hunger increasing, you might think it would spell the end of President Nicolas Maduro's time. Not likely. The opposition isn't even bothering to take part.
Hungry, sick and desperate, Venezuela will head to the polls this week searching for a saviour. But with the main opposition boycotting the elections, claiming they're fraudulent, it's doubtful Nicolas Maduro will lose his hold on the presidency. Will another 6-year term see any real change for his people? An oil-rich country, Venezuela was ruled by Hugo Chavez for 14 years. Representing his Socialist Party for 4 presidential terms from 1999 until his death in 2013. Under Chavez, oil revenue fuels Venezuela's economy. Priced at around $100 a barrel, billions flowed through the state-owned petrol company PDVSA. This income helped the economy thrive, but also saw the government overspending on social programs and food subsidies to help Venezuelans. After President Chavez's death in 2013, Vice President Nicolas Maduro took over the reins. And when oil prices crashed in 2014, the massive subsidies propping up Venezuela became unsustainable. 4 years since the economic crash, and Venezuela now has the highest inflation rate in the world at 13,779% and the worst living conditions in the country's history. Prices for basic foods such as bread have skyrocketed, with many skipping meals and even begging.
Lo que tenga que pagar o lo que debe pagar diariamente para poder llegar a su trabajo, en muchos casos está superando lo que percibe diariamente por ese trabajo. Entonces,
hundreds of Venezuelans have attempted to escape the dire poverty by migrating to neighbouring countries, an exodus described by the United Nations as a humanitarian disaster.
Y yo estoy queriendo no irme del país y tratando de hacer lo posible por no irme del país, como otros compañeros que han decidido simplemente emigrar del país o simplemente buscar otro ingreso.
Despite this, President Maduro claims the poverty lines and months of protests against his leadership are exaggerated by the international press. Protests which saw more than 100 people die, but failed to see Maduro resign.
Ustedes quieren ver cómo se abre un nuevo tiempo de renacimiento económico y prosperidad. Pues se los digo, lo van a ver. Confíen en mí.
Most opposition parties are boycotting the election, claiming it doesn't provide conditions for a fair vote, with the odds stacked in President Maduro's favour. As protests against the elections continue and food poverty lines increase, what difference, if any, will the elections really make to Venezuela? Will its people ever recover from the impacts of the economic collapse, or are they destined to the same fate with another 6 years of Maduro?
OK, 13,000% inflation, it said in that piece. I referenced 18,000%. It's gone down a little bit, so perhaps things are improving, although probably not by a great deal. Welcome to Roundtable, and I'm pleased to say that joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Sonia Schott, a political analyst who focuses on US Latin American relations. We also have in London Diego Moya-Ocampos, a risk analyst for Latin America at IHS Markit. Jacques Arnold is with us, consultant on Latin American affairs. He was in Venezuela when Chavez was elected. And Javier Farje, journalist and former editor at the Latin America Bureau, who says he's a reluctant supporter of Maduro. One Peruvian, 2 Venezuelans, and an expert in the field who happens to be British. Sonia, Venezuela, let me come to you first of all. How is it that somebody who presides over an inflation rate of 18,000, 13,000, it doesn't really matter what you call it, the highest in the world, is even still remotely popular?
Well, what we are seeing now in Venezuela is that President Maduro wants to remain in power. This is his main goal. That's why he dares to be a candidate in the coming elections. Of course, what will happen in the elections next Sunday, it's what the government wants to be. What will be the strategy for the government? Of course, to remain in power. Do the other candidates, they have a possibility to win? Who knows, perhaps, if the game is to change the face to the government in order to have a new figure to negotiate with the international community dealing with the sanctions and all the crisis, because Venezuela, the government of Venezuela, need a little bit of fresh air in order to survive.
Diego, let me come to you on this one, also Venezuelan. The point I'm trying to get at is he's likely to be voted back in, and yet people are suffering, have suffered for years and years. Why does he still have a support base?
If the 20 May presidential election were to be a free and fair election, Maduro will hold no chance whatsoever of being re-elected. Nevertheless, the complex patronage system that the government and Maduro himself have introduced, where the CLAP, the subsidized food distribution system, basically is supplied to low-income populations in exchange of political support, and those who basically refuse to vote, or those who vote against the government, and most of these people will be supervised when they exercise the right to vote, are a key component of the strategy under which the government aims to be re-elected. So it's not a free and fair election. People are going to be forced to go to turn out to vote, despite the fact, again, as you referred in the beginning, that the most representative coalition of the opposition is calling for abstention from the vote, and many people are going to be supervised while they're voting to make sure that they're voting for Maduro, which is the candidate for the ruling party. It's a very complex patronage system, and this is how the whole system basically works, and this is the bet of the government to re-elect itself.
Javier, I know you wanted to respond to some of that, but I mean, he is pretty likely to get back in.
Well, not likely. Yeah,
there is
almost likely. But
Falcone,
Henry Falcone can put up a good fight. Don't forget that it's true that the official position of the opposition is to boycott, but there's a front within the opposition umbrella group that supports Falcone, because some people are fed up with the idea that you should boycott every election. And within the National Assembly, which is controlled by the opposition, there is a front, they have created a front to support Henry Falcone's candidature. And not only that, one.
So we should look out for him too. But let me ask you this: why are you a reluctant supporter, but still a supporter of Nicolas Maduro, given the state of the country?
Yeah, I would say I'm more than reluctant. I would say more critical supporter. I'll tell you what the problem with Venezuela is.
But supporter nonetheless?
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. I'll tell you why. Let me explain to you based on what we have heard before. One of the problems that Venezuela has, I was there 3 months ago, and I was an observer for the regional elections last year in Lara State, which Falcone lost, is that the opposition has not offered the Venezuelan people a valid, a credible alternative to the current problem. They decide, it's a wide range of political parties, like around 35 parties from the left to the right, which don't seem to agree about a common program to get out of the economic crisis, which exists in Venezuela. It would be ridiculous to pretend that's not the case. The Maduro group, the socialists, they have a fixed constituency of around 6 million people who usually vote for them, which is not good enough to win an election if we're talking about a massive attendance to the polls, but that's the people who vote for Maduro anyway. But the opposition, I was able to talk to people in the streets when I was there 3 months ago, and I've seen other analysis from people who tend to be quite critical and say, look, the opposition is incoherent, is divided. When Falcone decided to stand as candidate, he was expelled from the mood. Now people within the mood are trying, the opposition umbrella group, they say, actually, no, we should support him. I mean, they are not offering a valid alternative to the... Listen, if the opposition...
But you're still a supporter. Why do you support him?
Because there's no other alternative to the situation in Venezuela at the moment.
Okay, and
why
is there no alternative?
This is precisely the point. This is a carbon copy of the electoral book of Putin. You look for your most likely opponent, you fix on the side to accuse him of corruption and get him sent down, and then you say on those grounds you can't stand in the election. They have basically eliminated any potential good candidates. The only remaining one, Falcone, is an ex-Chavista. Is he? Who knows? The whole thing is a tragedy. And what I find most tragic of all, it is one after another, the Marxists take control, they run the country into the ground, they worry about losing, they turn to repression. You can see a long run, the Russia post the Soviet Union killed itself, onto Russia. Nicaragua, Cuba, now Venezuela, the country with the largest oil deposits in the world, people are starving. And it's an absolute outrage, and using food, as you've just heard, to get people to vote for this chap. It's a future for Venezuela, which explains why all the brightest and best of the country are running abroad, the most wealthy to the United States and Europe, and the poor to Colombia.
Sonia, let me put this one to you, and we'll expand on this one. I have read that the only serious opposition to him once he comes back into power could be the military, who back him at the moment. And the military might turn against him if the protests on the streets continue and become uncontrollable. Is that the way that you see it?
Okay, let me start by saying that the problem with the opposition not to participating in these elections remains a big problem. It was a decision of the government. And why the opposition is calling to abstention? Because they don't want to legitimize a process that's illegitimate by origin. By saying that, the appeal is to all the people in Venezuela, to all the social sectors in Venezuela, in order to go against Maduro, which is an illegitimate government.
Okay, but may I bring you back to the question?
If the military can help
in
democratic ways, that will be a solution, but we are not talking about a coup.
But let me bring you back to the question, which is, do you see the military as one of the reasons why he might fail if the protests on the streets become too much and he loses military support?
Well, okay, the military in Venezuela was very unpopular because they went against the protesters when they were gathering in the past, trying to protest against Maduro regime. Right now, it's not very clear since we have seen the mass migration coming from Venezuela in every country. You can see not just only in Latin America, in Europe, in the US, everywhere are Venezuelans escaping from the crisis. So that will undermine also a participation for protest and for to speak against the government of Maduro too.
Thanks, Jacques. I'll come to you in a moment, if I may, on that one. But I'd like to get Diego's view on the same question. How much does he rely on military support, and would that crumble if things went wrong on the streets?
The main point is that the weaker Maduro becomes, the more influential behind the scenes the armed forces. And when I was previously referring to this complex patronage system where the government or security apparatus basically supplies food at a subsidized cost to low-income populations in exchange of political support, we have to say that the military plays a key role, because it is sectors of the military, the cronies, the ones which conduct the imports. The military basically runs the economy. The military controls the ports, the military controls oil services, the military controls mining, illegal mining, and some segments of the military, not all, are highly involved also in drug trafficking. So the key thing is that the weaker Maduro becomes, the more influential the armed forces behind the scenes. And the armed forces have a strong incentive to keep Maduro in power, because Maduro, for them, represents continuity and the consolidation of their economic power and the political influence. Now,
can I stop you there and bring Jacques back in? We will come back to that particular point, Diego, if we may, but Jacques wanted to weigh in at this point.
Yes, because the military in Latin America are always strong for the country, for the law and order, and that is why they will support the government of the day. The dilemma is when they find a government that is incompetent and failing, do they intervene? Those days are no more. any military intervention, as we saw in Paraguay, the rest of Latin America will come down on them like a ton of bricks. And it is an immense dilemma for the Venezuelan military. If they do want to intervene to save the suffering of the Venezuelan people, they know that military intervention is very unfashionable
and could
today.
they do that by supporting another candidate, if you like, an alternative?
No, I think the military, in the end, it would be in the form of a military coup, as they would put it, in the interests of the people.
Perhaps not likely. Javier, your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to something that Diego mentioned, which is about the military controlling the economy.
Well, I'll try to respond to the 3 against 1 thing anyway. First of all, Maduro is not illegitimate. He was elected in 2013. Yes. By an election that were recognized by the opposition. There's nothing illegitimate about the government of Maduro. He didn't stay longer in power. He was elected, and he's standing as a candidate. So he is a legitimate candidate. Second, the military. You have a good point there. What happened in Venezuela is that Chavez, when he took over after the 2002 coup, failed coup, where it lasted 48 hours, he integrated the army, the armed forces, within his social and political movement. They are very highly I think they're probably the most politicized armed forces in Latin America at the moment. They are very political. I had a meeting with a general in Lara State last year for the elections, and one of the elements that have actually made them think twice about supporting somebody else is the threat by Trump that there might be a military intervention. Don't forget that Trump said that he didn't rule out military intervention. Now, no army officer would ever accept something like that. So in that respect, you have 2 elements. The political element of the armed forces in Venezuela, highly politicized, quite lefty, but on the other hand, the fact that as an institution they could not accept an intervention from somebody else, and that galvanizes that. There are elements within the army who actually are against. I agree with that. I'm not going to deny that. So that is how I see the situation at the moment. The subsidized food, of course, they have to keep subsidized food because there is a serious food shortage in Venezuela. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't see what the problem is with that. If they don't give food to the poor, then they criticize them for not giving food to the poor. Damn it, they do. Damn if they don't.
Okay. Who wants to take this one on? If, as Diego says, the military have such a big position within the economy, how come they've overseen, A, the inflation rate we've got, and secondly, the richest country in terms of oil reserves in the world, production's been falling? I don't get it. I think Diego wants to come in on that one, Jason.
And it's just a joke. I mean, when Chavez came to power in 1999, oil production stood at 3.4 million barrels per day. At the moment, oil production stands at 1.4 million barrels per day, and it's possible that by the end of the year, it will be close to 1 million barrels per day. So that's a dramatic fall. So Venezuela, the largest proven oil reserve in the world, but one country where yet oil production continues systematically declining, a country which has a humanitarian crisis.
But why is that happening?
A country where food, well, basically economic mismanagement is one of the key things. And these shortages of food and basic goods, including medicines, is something which attributable first to Chavez and now obviously to President Maduro. But the key point I wanted to make about the military is that Maduro
I'm sorry, Diego, I'm going to jump in there just because we are limited on time. Economic incompetence by people who...
Totally so, because prior to Chavez, every Venezuelan government knew that the golden goose was PDVSA and the oil industry,
which is the state-owned oil company,
providing the money. The trouble was Chavez and now Maduro put in their own placement into PDVSA, the oil company, who don't know how to run a milk stall. And the consequence is the money has failed. It's a country that's never been properly diversified in its economy away from the oil industry, and poverty applies. I also find it a great tragedy to say that the government has to hand out food to the ordinary people. What kind of economic mess have they made of the country that the government has to distribute?
Well, look, I must point out that even in the UK we have food parcels going up because of tough times. I'm going to come to you in just a moment, Javier. Sure. I know you're desperate to jump in, but we've left Sonia on her own for a little bit here.
I want to agree for some of this.
What is it going to take? What is it going to take to turn around the economy? Because we saw in the reporter's piece there, Maduro saying, trust me, I'll get it all straight. But what is it, in your opinion, going to need to happen?
In Venezuela, the point will be, first, a political change, of course. And then I am sure the international institutions will help Venezuela too. The sanctions will be lifted. And of course, we need a deep change in the economic system, the current economic system, which is not working. The proof is there, because the crisis is not coming from, I don't know, from heaven. It's happened because of this mismanagement of the Maduro government, but it was a consequence of also bad politics of the Chavez regime. But the Chavez regime profit from a very high oil prices.
That's right.
So that's why it was not dramatic to that time. And now we are seeing, since the price were down, that the situation worse in Venezuela.
Javier, I know you wanted to agree, but we can leave that to one side.
Sure.
New points.
Well, first of all, yes, I agree that the oil production has suffered because the Chavez government increased the dependency of Venezuela on the oil revenues, but they didn't improve the infrastructure to produce it. That has been one of the biggest problems Venezuela has faced, lack of investment in the oil infrastructure of the country, which is absurd, because if you're going to increase your dependency on one product, you may as well invest in the infrastructure that makes it possible.
Because then you can afford the
to
social schemes that are making you popular, etc., etc.
There's obsolete plans which are not really working, and that has...
Okay, so the question
oil
now,
prices yes.
The question now is, if Maduro stays in power, can he turn it around, or does it take something else?
I think the only way for me in Venezuela to turn around is that if Maduro wins, he wants to start renegotiations with the opposition. There has to be go back to the negotiating table to find some kind of common points with opposition parties to make sure that they work together in those areas where they can agree in terms of helping the economy, in terms of diversifying the economy, which is not happening in Venezuela. I agree with Diego, and I agree with you, Jacques. There's no diversification of the economy in Venezuela, and that's a big problem.
Okay, so it's unlikely, I would say from what you say, it's unlikely to happen.
But also they have to leave the exchange rate control, which has created a thriving black market of currency that has to be lifted. And many supporters of the government have been saying to the government, leave that nonsense. It doesn't make any sense.
What would happen then if you did that?
It's making things even worse.
The currency would fall through the floor until the government faces up to the fact putting professional management into PDVSA to get the oil flow back to its previous levels. Venezuela is doomed, and even more doomed, because anybody of get up and go and professionalism has beaten the high road.
Well, and they're either in Colombia or they've gone elsewhere.
World.
What I still don't get is how somebody can be so stupid to allow this to happen. First Chavez and then Maduro. Diego, jump in on that one.
Well, another issue has been widespread corruption. So some of these things have been deliberately and the result of widespread corruption. I mean, Maduro leaves the most corrupt country in the whole Latin American region, according to Transparency International. And this is crucial because Chavez came to power with the pledge of dealing with corruption, tackling income inequality, and now, you know, after his government and now after the government of his appointed successor, you have a country which is much less corrupt than it was in the days of the democracy, and much less unequal.
Okay, who's getting rich?
And that's
who's stealing all the money?
reality. Well, the government, the military, or the military government that Maduro leads, right? These are the guys who run the economy, and they lead the economy. And there's a perverse relation between the military, which controls the economy, and also controls the security apparatus. So the same people who profit from the shortages of food and basic goods are the ones responsible for repressing the population when there are waves of protests, like it was the case last year when we saw university students, civil society groups, people from the shanty towns expressing their discontent against the government, and they were crushed by security forces. Most of them people younger than 25 years and shot in the head, many of them.
Okay, well, Javier here is saying that's not true. I haven't got time to come back to you on that, but register your protest. Sonia, as a Venezuelan, we're getting towards the end of the program. Do you think things are going to be better or worse if he's re-elected in the longer term?
You mean Maduro?
Yeah.
That Venezuela is going to be better? why should be when he had the opportunity the last 4 years, over almost 5 years, and it didn't happen? Why should happen this after the elections? I don't see he has any possibility to improve the Venezuelan situation, the crisis. In order to Venezuela to recover, they need a change, because nobody is so good to remain in power forever.
Okay, very quick, if you don't mind, Jacques. Are we going to see US intervention if things go?
No, we're not. Okay. We live in the modern world. The tragedy of Venezuela is it's a Marxist playground for all their theories. The result has been the same as it always has been from right the way through from the Soviet Union. It ends up an economic disaster for the ordinary people and a tragedy.
To my two guests, my two Venezuelan guests, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Diego. Our time is up. We will see May the 20th. Watch out for Henry Falcone. I think if he gets a high percentage of the vote, it could be interesting to see which way things go after that. We have fixed our little mechanical problem. We put some money in the meter. If only Venezuela had the opportunity to do the same. For me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking part, and we hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye.